Welcome to Cold Case Solved, New Science for Cold Crimes, a podcast about cold cases and emerging forensic science techniques that are solving them. I'm your host, Natasha, and I'm excited to explore the cases of our not-so-distant past and investigative techniques of our emerging future. Advancements in forensic science are not only solving cold cases, they're also challenging legal precedent. Join me on a journey of remembering the past and witnessing the future. Subscribe to Cold Case Solved wherever you listen. This episode of Cold Case Solved, New Science for Cold Crimes is about the horrific crime committed against little Ljubica Topic, a 6-year-old girl who went missing in 1971 from her own backyard in Windsor, Ontario. For nearly 50 years, the crime remained unsolved. That is, of course, until changes in forensic science finally provided closure to Ljubica's family, as well as challenged the legalities of privacy laws. Let's get into today's case. Imagine for a moment you are caring for a loved one who is younger than you. I'm sure most people have been a babysitter at some point in their lives for friends or family. Maybe you're a parent, an aunt or an uncle, a grandparent. Life with little ones, depending on you, is busy. It can be a lot to manage. It's because of stories like this one that I have become a super diligent parent. You probably could call me a helicopter mom. And I can't help it. As I've talked about before on episodes of Crime Squad podcast, which is another podcast I do, missing person cases really get to me. Obviously, homicide cases are terrible also, but something about the not knowing gets into my head. As I'm washing dishes or putting away laundry, I find myself thinking about all the people out there that have vanished without a trace and how their families must feel. If anything like that ever happened to someone I know, I don't know if I would recover. The thing is, I'm completely okay with being a little bit paranoid as a parent. The reason? Being aware and involved in my kids' lives means they'll be harder for a predator to get to. And despite living in a relatively private lot in a row home with a fenced deck, there is no way I would ever let my 3.5-year-old play outside by himself, even if he was confined to the deck with the gate locked. I have eyes on him at all times. In my mind, which is full of horrifying true crime cases, you can never be too careful. So if you can see where I'm going with this, you're caring for a child for whatever reason. Imagine the child asks you if they can play outside for a bit. You say yes because why wouldn't you? It's a beautiful May day, the sun is shining, and you're in a decent neighborhood. After a little while, you decide it's time to come in and start the nighttime routine. You go outside to get them, but they aren't there. Your heart rate quickens slightly, but nothing too intense. You call their name a few times, playfully at first, but then with more urgency. Then you're frustrated. It isn't funny anymore. You want them inside. So you start to stomp around the yard looking for them. You try to ignore the panic rising, the tight feeling in your stomach. It will be fine, you think. I'll find them in just a few minutes. But you don't. You don't find them in the yard, down the street, or at the playground close by. You don't find them at their friends' houses. And now you're dry-mouthed and feeling nauseated because you know something's wrong. The dread feels like icy fingers gripping you, tightening their grasp. It doesn't feel right, and it's time to call the police. This is what I imagine it must feel like, an impending sense of dread. Where are they? Some people never get the answer. Some people do, but their loved one is still gone forever because they've been the victim of a violent crime. And for Paula Topic, Ljubica Topic's mother, you wait 50 years to find out who took your child, and every single day before she was taken and after you find out who did it is agony and devastation. You miss her every day. The Topic family immigrated from Yugoslavia to Windsor, Ontario, Canada in 1966. They bought a home and made a life in Ontario. Paula's husband, Ljubica's father, worked afternoons, and Paula stayed home to tend to their 4 children: Mary, Ljubica, Tatiana, and Michael. Ljubica was born April 7, 1965, and was just about a year old when she moved to Canada with her family. I wasn't able to find her sister Tatiana's date of birth, but her brother Michael would have been born in 1963. Mirjana, known as Mary, was born in 1966, making the Topic family a family of 6. Windsor, Ontario, borders Detroit, Michigan. In 1971, it was populated by approximately 205,000 residents. The Topics settled in nicely to their neighborhood, and the kids, like kids do, or at least did pre-internet and video games and anxiety disorders, made friends pretty quickly. May 14, 1971 began like any other day. In the early evening, Ljubica and her brother Michael went out to play with several other neighborhood children in a parking lot near the Topic family home. Around 8 p.m. that evening, while enjoying the activities outside, Ljubica went in her house when she found her mother in the kitchen. There were some candies on the table, and Ljubica asked her mother if she could have one. Ljubica's mother told her she could definitely have a candy, which Ljubica took. As she made her way back outside to play, her mother told her not to stay out too long. That would be the last interaction Ljubica and her mother had. About an hour after Ljubica left, her mother called the children inside. It was time to come home and wind down before the nighttime routine of getting ready for bed. Michael arrived home without Ljubica, and Paula asked Michael where his sister was. Michael, who was 8 years old at the time, said that as they were playing, a man who exited a restaurant located across the street had approached them. He specifically singled out Ljubica, offering her $8 to help him complete a task or job of some kind. According to Michael, the man gave him a dime to ride his bike away from the direction Ljubica and the man were walking. The last time Michael saw his sister was between 8:30 and 9 p.m., as she walked away with the man holding his hand. An hour or less after Paula Topic saw her daughter in their kitchen, she had vanished without a trace. Instincts kicked in immediately, and Paula began to search for her daughter, running through the streets. I can only imagine the panic she must have felt right from the get-go. It's not like Ljubica had wandered off with a friend her age. She had been led away by a man who didn't want Michael following along. This didn't sound good. Paula walked from their residence to Seminole Street, which was about a kilometer away from their home. She didn't see any traces of her daughter, and as night began to fall, her worry only increased. Paula recalls that during her search, she spotted a police officer patrolling in his vehicle. She flagged him down and told him someone had taken her little girl. Within just minutes, the surrounding community had been made aware of what was going on, and more officers arrived in the area. What began was one of the biggest police hunts in Windsor's history. Everybody wanted to know, where was Ljubica? Looking at pictures of Ljubica is heartbreaking because I can see the innocence in her face. She has a heart-shaped face with soft features. She has straight-cut bangs and shoulder-length brown hair. Her nose is petite, her lips are full with the corners upturned into a small smile. But it's her eyes that stick out to me. She has beautiful large eyes that sparkle even in a photograph. Those eyes are a window into a life that could have been. For hours after her disappearance, police and residents of Windsor searched for any trace of little Ljubica. The search ended at approximately 1 a.m. on May 15th when a police officer who was scanning yards on Hickory Road, about a kilometer away from the Topic household, saw something in a yard. He was using his flashlight to light up the areas he was searching. He approached and saw it was the body of a little girl. It was an awful discovery. It was clear to police and the medical examiner that Ljubica had fought her attacker, and fought him hard. The police officer noted that Ljubica's face was covered in blood and her right leg was broken. She was missing teeth, which were found in the dirt near her body. Police also recovered an adult tooth, a detail which was not released to the media or the Topic family at the time. They were unsure if it belonged to the perpetrator, but did collect it as potential evidence. After the medical examination of Ljubica's battered body was completed, it was revealed she had suffered a violent sexual assault and had the life savagely beaten out of her small body. She was just 6 years old. It was a vicious, cold, and callous murder that was sexually motivated, and police had no leads. To begin the investigation, police created a sketch of the man who lured Ljubica away, with the details being provided by Michael Topic. Michael recalled the man as being a tall, thin-faced man who was slender. He said the man had blonde hair and was maybe in his teens or early 20s. The sketch was distributed and police were hopeful it would lead to a tip, but sadly, the case would grow cold. The years went on, and on, and on. Paula Topic, who did not speak publicly regarding this horrible tragedy until 2015, has said she relives May 14, 1971 in her mind almost every day. She keeps a picture of Ljubica in her dining room and told the Windsor Star that every time she looks at the picture of Ljubica, she thinks about her. Every time Paula passes by, she says to the photograph, "Honey, I miss you." Paula recalls Ljubica as being a sweet little girl, a girl who wouldn't even step on an ant if she saw one. The case had been reopened 6 times over the years, but would be set aside each time due to lack of leads and evidence. Seemingly, no movement in the case had occurred. That is until 2015, when police finally publicly revealed that during the initial processing of the crime scene, they had found an adult male front incisor tooth. The tooth appeared to have been snapped off at the gum line. Police indicated the tooth was believed to have been from the male suspect. Police admitted also this detail had not been released initially because they had decided it would be considered holdback evidence. Holdback evidence is evidence that isn't released to the public, and it helps investigators determine if tips provided by the public are valid or not. They chose to release the information 44 years after Ljubica was murdered because the case had sat cold for such a long time. The hope was that this would generate new tips or leads. So here's where we get into the science of things and the advancements in forensic technology. Over the years, forensic testing has advanced astronomically. The advancement that helped to solve this case is genetic genealogy. This has become a valuable tool in cold case investigations. Genetic genealogy is a method of comparing DNA samples to create genetic relationships between individuals. It's an awesome tool for building family trees and tracing ancestry. In the crime world, it's changing the way police investigators locate people who have committed criminal acts. I first heard about the use of genealogical DNA to solve cases in 2018 when the Golden State Killer was finally caught using this method. There are even DNA kits you can buy to get information on your own genetic makeup, and many of these companies have the option for users to opt in to sharing their genetic information with law enforcement. This is how investigators are able to compare DNA found at crime scenes against potential genetic relatives. From there, the data is further analyzed to narrow down the familial link and find the match. I'm very intrigued by this methodology, and I actually ordered myself a DNA processing kit late last year. The kit came, I spit in the included tube, and I mailed it back to the processing facility. After a number of weeks, I not only received a full breakdown of my genetic makeup, but it also provided me a list of individuals from around the world who share my DNA. In other words, family members. I chose to opt in to share my DNA with law enforcement, so you never know. Maybe one day my DNA will help to solve a crime. Investigative genetic genealogy is considered more of a lead generator than actual evidence. An arrest or confirmation can only occur if more investigation happens, but it certainly has been working in solving cold cases like this one. In 1971, DNA had been collected from the crime scene where Ljubica Topic was found. Over the decades, as advancements in DNA analyzation advanced, DNA samples from the case would be analyzed periodically. No matches ever came up. But let us fast forward to 2015, when a police officer took a fresh look at the case. They found there was an article within the evidence collection from the crime scene that had never been tested before. This material was sent to be analyzed, and what came back was something that hadn't turned up in the former investigations. The article turned up 7 different sources of DNA, and when further compared, this DNA was later determined to belong to the same person. Windsor police enlisted the help of Parabon Nanolabs, a US-based company that assists law enforcement with genetic genealogy. It was then that they found yet another lead. DNA was linked to a specific person, and it wasn't an exact match by any means, but it was a starting point. There was a person with DNA in the database. After additional investigating, police were able to drill down someone they believed to be the main suspect. Part of the investigation required investigators to obtain tissue samples from this individual, who happened to be a distant cousin to the match found in the database. When the tissue samples and the DNA found at the crime scene were compared, they were an exact match. It was in 2019, 48 long years of not knowing, that investigators announced the crime was finally solved. They knew who did this terrible thing, fracturing not only the family, but the entire community. The name of the man responsible was known to police. However, in a shocking twist, Windsor police would decline to name him. They would not reveal the killer's name. This type of forensic testing is so new that it challenges the legal precedent related to privacy laws. When a person is charged with a crime, that becomes their criminal record, and they can be named in relation to what they are charged with. But the man who killed Ljubica had died at some point, and a deceased individual can't be charged with a crime because they can't defend themselves according to law. Therefore, their name can't be released according to today's privacy rules. The Windsor Star, the city's well-known local newspaper, wasn't having this. Surely the presence of DNA affirmed the crime, and after 50 years, people had the right to know. The newspaper submitted a Freedom of Information request to obtain the name. Windsor police denied the request. The Windsor Star appealed this decision, but again, they were denied. The second denial was unacceptable to the media outlet, so this launched a very lengthy appeal and mediation process. This battle would drag on for more than 3 years until finally an adjudicator assigned to the process made a decision. That decision was in favor of releasing the identity of Ljubica's killer. Finally, the man had a name: Frank Arthur Hall. At the time he committed the horrific murder and sexual assault of little Ljubica Topic, he was 22 years old. He lived on the same street as her. He lived less than 2 kilometers from the Topic residence on the same road at the time of this heinous crime. At some point in his life, Hall had moved to Edmonton, Alberta, where he lived until he died at the age of 70 in February of 2019. I suppose this is closure of some kind. As an outsider looking in, though, I fail to see how this changes anything. Frank Hall is already dead. He doesn't have to answer to his terrible crime. There is no information released regarding crimes he committed while he lived his life, so maybe this was a first and last time. One thing is for certain, though, he got to live his life and Ljubica did not. He moved on and presumably had some kind of interpersonal relationship with someone over the last 50 years. The Topic family, however, will always remember May 14th as the day they lost their beloved family member, their daughter, their sister. If this is what forensics can do today, imagine what they can do tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of Cold Case Solved: New Science for Cold Crimes. Subscribe so you don't miss any releases, and if you enjoy the way I tell stories, check out Crime Squad Podcast. That's my other podcast, and I release Canadian true crime episodes and bonus content monthly. Feel free to give a rating if you like the content. And if you have an idea for a case you want me to cover, or if you have a personal story about one of the cases I've already covered, feel free to reach out. Thanks for listening, and remember that sometimes the dead speak loudest when they cannot speak at all.